Hey everybody, we are starting sketch number 5 this week. So you are working with charcoal again, but this is different because you're only using white charcoal and we're going on to black paper. So the goal is to create the illusion of a transparent glass. So this time I decided to go with something where there's nothing in it, so there's no water or anything, so we're just going to do an empty glass. And as opposed to last week when we did the apple, we're going for a lot of simplicity today. Last week there was a lot of blending and layering, and this is sort of kind of a one-hit drawing. We're going to try and just get clean lines and do them right the first time, so we're going to move a little bit slower, but there's a whole lot less to actually put into the drawing. So what you will need is you will need a white charcoal pencil. I put a little eraser on the back. If you don't want to do that, just make sure you have a separate pencil with an eraser on it or a separate eraser handy, and a blending stump. That's all we need. If you wanted to use a ruler, I guess you could have one. I tend to not use them, but if it makes you feel better about doing straight lines, you can do that as well. Okay, so starting this off, we're going to go really, really slow to make sure things are lined up correctly, because a glass should be pretty symmetrical. So when I start this, I sort of just give myself a couple dots just to start off with. So I want to make sure you can see here. I'll make them a little bigger. You want them to be in line, so you don't want one higher than the other. Again, if you want to use a ruler or something to measure and make sure, you can. Okay? And then this glass does have a slight angle to it. Okay? It kind of comes in a bit of an angle, nothing too crazy. So you can kind of go down and sort of work your way in. I don't like to draw the line right away. I like to give myself a stopping point. Okay? And then same thing. And you can't quite see if you're doing it right yet, but that's why we're only making little dots. That way, if it's not quite even or lined up, you're only erasing a tiny dot rather than a whole entire line. Okay, so hopefully these two bottom dots should still be in a nice even row. And we're kind of just eyeballing it to make sure they're the same distance inside to give us the same angle. So once you have that, okay, a lot of people like to be super sketchy. I'm going to try and draw off to the side so you can see. I try to do more of one continuous line, so I'm looking at where I'm going. A lot of people only look where their pencil is and then they don't see where they end up. So watch where you're going and make this line super light. It's okay if it wiggles or wobbles a little bit because we're going light. Okay, and so you can see your resulting angle a lot more clear now. Okay, so to me it looks like this is angling in quite a bit more than the other one will. So I'm just going to very lightly start putting this in so I can see the angle I'm getting. And to me, if I go over to this dot, it's not quite following this angle, so I'm actually going to start to move it in just a touch because I'm looking at these angles. I want them to be as close as I can get to the same. So we don't have a lot of detail to get in this drawing, so do stop and start if you need to, erase and redraw, but just don't get too carried away with perfection. But we're just getting as close as we can to the same type of angle coming in. Okay, so make adjustments if you need to. Everyone will probably need to. It's very rare to get something just perfectly right your first time. Okay, close as you can get. Once you think you have that, we're just going to close in the glass, and we're going to do the same thing. Okay, we're going to do an arc for the bottom and an arc for the top, but we want this arc to be consistent. We don't want it to be really rounded here and then really sharp there. So what I like to do is I start with just pulling out little arcs on both sides so I know they kind of match. They don't dip down too far at once. And then I slowly just kind of bring them in to meet in the middle. So that way it seems to be a nice even arc. It doesn't come up higher on one side than the other or dip down way low here, and it's kind of as even as you can get it again. Okay, same thing at the top. I want to arc it up, try and get a similar arc on the other side. If these angles, so imagine if there was a straight line here, which you can even make one to see you're looking at this angle and you want it to be about the same on both sides. Okay, and then you're working your way in. We don't want it to be too round and bubbly, because when you're looking at a glass, even though the top is round, when you're looking at it at an angle like we are here, it's going to come out more like an oval. Okay, So you're getting that arc there, and then to close in the oval, you're working your way back in here. So now you're arcing down. Okay, again, you're checking to make sure, like this one looks like it's going lower than that one right now. So which one looks better? You're working your way to meet them. Okay, a lot of work to get a very simple shape, but hopefully it is worth all the effort. The next thing I like to do is I don't want this to look too pointy, so I usually will go through and make some adjustments to sort of round it out if it is looking pointy, and that tends to happen at least when I draw. So if you have sort of a pointy looking cup, you can start to round maybe out your edges a touch, if that makes sense. And then you have the basis for your drawing. Okay, so if you have any major sketch lines that are not what you want to keep, go through and clean them up a little bit. This white charcoal does erase pretty nicely, I think, so mistakes are fairly easy to get rid of. Okay, so now we want to make this glass look like it's, has some thickness to it and like it's shiny and reflective. You don't want it to look like a plastic bucket, which is kind of what it looks like now. Slide this just a touch. Okay. So we're just going to start marking out some basic areas. We'll work our way down to the more specific details. So on this glass, it's got a thick bottom. Most glasses do, so they don't break when you set them down. So we're going to establish that thick glass bottom. So you're going to start, give yourself, maybe a ½ inch or so, 3/4 of an inch. And again, mark it out on both sides to get it as even as you can, just to start it. And then we have the same thing going on with that oval shape. Okay, so we have an arc down and an arc up, very similar to what you have there. So once you established how high up from the bottom you're going to start, same idea, getting that arc kind of marked out. And then you want this arc to run parallel to here. So you don't want to dip down really deep. You want to follow that same kind of curve. Keep that same distance away the entire time. Keep your lines really light. You probably will make a mistake, so anticipate that by drawing lightly so you can erase them. And then same idea, arcing around. Check to make sure your angles are about the same and bring them together. Okay, once you draw something, always kind of glance at it. Make sure it looks even. If it needs to be, if you want to round it out a little bit like we did in the top, make your adjustments as you go. Okay, so that part is now marked out. And then also, a lot of glasses have sort of a little dip in the bottom, sort of like it curves up. So we're going to establish that as well. The good thing about drawing glass is that there's often little imperfections in glass where there's like air bubbles or it's a little thicker in certain areas, so the light bends when it hits. So sometimes if you do have arcs that are a little off, it can still look okay because a lot of times these little imperfections in the glass cause slightly irregular lines. So you don't have to be super paranoid, but you do want to keep things as clean as possible and let any little errors you have be those imperfections. Okay, so we've established the main layout, so now we're just going to start pulling in some highlights just a little bit at a time. So we'll start with the base because I think those are the biggest ones, a little easier to see. So basically on the right and left of the glass we have sort of inside the edge, sort of like a rectangular shape, so I like to kind of mark it out to begin with. Okay, on the other side there's sort of a wiggly line. I think that's where you can see sort of imperfections in the glass, so you can maybe be a little less careful with how precisely you make that line. Okay, and I'm just marking those out. I'm not going to super shade too much right now because I want to get everything just laid out. Okay, and down the sides of the glasses we have lots of highlights because you have a double layer of glass really tight up next to each other because these curve in. So you can just kind of follow along with what I'm doing here. So this outside one, I'm not too close to the edge, notice, and it does have a couple wiggly wobbly parts, so don't make it too like crazy zigzaggy, but you can be a little funky with that line. Okay, we're going to pull down another one. It's a little more straight. So I'm kind of following this edge. Okay, and again, we're just marking things out right now. Not spreading anything or making anything super bright. And I'm going to see if I can squeeze one more in here along the edge. And again, I'm saying pretty straight. You don't have to be super paranoid about it, but there you go. Okay, so this reflection kind of carries into the other side, the glass that's on the back. So I have one little arc here. It's kind of going into there, and then a couple little lines coming off of that. Not anything too crazy. Moving to the other side, we'll start in the back here. So I'm in this corner, and I'm going to do sort of like a roller coaster on its side. So just an out and a dip. Does not have to be exactly the same as mine. Okay. We're just sort of trying to get a nice arc that reflects the arcs of the sides of the glass. Okay, and then we're doing the same sort of thing here where we have a semi-irregular line on the outside. And then a couple more reflective lines that more follow the arc or the edge of the glass towards the inside. And you can notice I'm sort of curling these out from the rim of the glass. They're not just coming straight down, I'm sort of taking that and arcing up and down. I wish you could see past, I'm a lefty. Arcing up and down through there. Filling in another section. Again, slow and steady with this. Okay, so we've marked out most of what we need for our main highlights. We do have some very, very subtle, soft highlights, but we will fill those in at the end, because I think if we put them in now, we're just going to end up smearing them away. So now we're just going to start gradually adding our intense highlights. You can kind of bounce around when you do this. Sometimes if I can't see an area showing up right, if I'm afraid I'm making a mistake but I don't know what it is, I'll just jump to another area and come back to it later. So that's probably what you'll see me do here. So I'm going to start with stuff that's easy, just to start to get it. So along the rim of this glass, you can see the value changes. It gets very intensely white to light to white to light, and it sort of alternates unevenly all the way around. So that's what we're going to start with, is making some areas of the rim of this glass very thick and very intensely white. Some other areas I'm just going to let stay soft. I'm not really going to do anything to it. Okay, and I'm going to go back in, darken in some other areas. Okay, most of this section that I have in here that I outlined, this blobby section, is pretty much in a highlight. So always start with a low pressure on your pencil. You can always add more pressure later and make it, typically it's darker, but because we're using a white lighter, you can always change the intensity of it later. So I'm starting light, and I'm just gradually going to add in some more intense darks later. I'm not going to blend too much right now. I just want to see values. I'm not too concerned about the texture. Okay, working my way down. For this one, I'm not going to go too light, but I am going to thicken it up a little bit, so it's not such a pencil thin line. It has a little bit of bulk to it. Okay, this next one as well, I'm not going too bright right now, but I am going to make it thicker in certain sections, just filling it in a little bit more. I think I'll make this section a little brighter, so I'm just going over it a little heavier. Okay. This I'm going to make darker, or lighter, so he's saying darker with more pressure, but I'm going to press harder here. I'm also going to pull this in. I'm going to sort of let these two sections almost run together. Okay. And then with the side of the glass, I'm going to do sort of like the top where it's sort of light fading to dark. Okay. Alright, so there's one section I've got in here. Working inside this section, I'm just going to sort of fill in a little bit of this oval and thicken up the bottom arc of this line just a touch. So I'm going to sort of work it in at an angle, slowly fade away that highlight. Okay. Along the bottom of the glass, I'm going to thicken that up a little bit, and then I'm going to start coloring in this section. Again, I'm going to start with low pressure just to get a highlight established. And then we can give certain areas of this highlight a little more intensity. So I'm pressing harder over here. Maybe a little harder along this line. Okay. Again, not blending yet. Okay. Now I'm working my way around inside this little section. Same thing. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a highlight that kind of fades out. And I'm going to work in a couple more little lines for where that glass bends and dips in. Okay. Nothing too detailed yet. Okay. Put a little tension at the top of this arc. I'm just going to right now just thicken it a little bit. I don't want to go too light, but I am just going to give it a little more structure to this line. Just thickening it up, making it a little easier to see. And as I move in these corner areas, because you have the glass overlapping so tightly, the light catches it a little harder. So these corner areas tend to have that brightest highlight. So I'm going to hit this a lot harder, let that fade in. Same thing with the bottom arc. I'm going to go a little intense with this light here. Let it fade in. Okay, and then this section here. So again, I'm going to fill in this area we marked out. Real light. I'm trying to color semi-neutral so I don't see a lot of direction. Okay, a little darker along this edge. Okay, so we're starting to establish some shininess going on here. Inside, I'll pull this back in. Inside I do have sort of little reflective arc lines, real subtle, so keep your hand loose and you're sort of just going along the same sort of arc as you already have, this oval. And I'm just getting some sort of lines that sort of fade in and out. No distinct stopping or starting point. I'm just going to add a couple and then stop. Always add more later, so try not to overdo any marks early on. Alright, let's work our way up this side. So same thing here. I'm just going to intensify this line, giving it a little more thickness, a little more brightness. I'm not going to like harsh white yet though. Okay. This next one is going to be my more intense highlight. So thicker and brighter, pressing a little harder. And I'm actually going to fill in the in-between with a really light value. Barely, like I'm just barely skating the pencil across it. So, super light. Okay, that's something to practice too, is how lightly you can kind of dance this across the page to get yourself a subtle value or a subtle mark. Okay, add in my next stripe. Just giving it a little intensity. I'm not thickening this one up too much just because I don't have a ton of room. And I do want to see a separation between the two, so just a little at a time. And then I'm giving the edge just a little bit more structure as well, just going over that first line I made. Okay. Hitting it harder in some areas than others. Okay, it's starting to happen. Hopefully you can see the shininess sort of starting to present itself into this highlight. I'm not going to color in the whole section like I did the other side. Being inconsistent can be good with this, so I am going to just give it sort of almost a stripiness where I have some dark sections, some light sections. Okay. Good start. So now is a point where you can kind of take a look at this and then make any adjustments. If something needs to be brighter, if one area looks like it doesn't have enough attention to it, adding a little more. You can take your blending stump. If you have some major texture issues, you can start to blend them in. You can use your finger if you want, but with a lot of these tight areas, it's hard to be precise with your finger. But to each his own. Use what works for you. If you're better with your finger, if you hate the sound of a blending stump, which a lot of people do, use what you can use. Okay, so I'm just sort of going to go over this whole thing and just soften up a lot of the lines. Help some of these transitions happen. Again, I'm not putting a ton of pressure on here because I want my light areas to stay light. I want my bright areas to stay really bright. I don't want to dull down everything and make it look the same. So I'm just barely giving this just a little bit of a spread. And that will get rid of some of any textural issues you have. Clean up your lines a little bit. I don't know if you can tell in the video so much, but some of that scribbly rough texture of the charcoal can get taken care of just by giving it a once rub over with this. Okay, so that is the basis of the glass. You may want to make some adjustments here. I'm not going to make any adjustments to what I have here until I get these little subtle highlights in now. Okay, so we have the sharp, bright highlights, and now we're going to get some of the softer ones in here. Okay, so you might be able to just use your blending sump because it might already have some white charcoal on it. So I'm going to start with that and see if it shows up. So certain areas like here, the middle section above this little hump here, I'm just going to get a very soft, fuzzy highlight right in there. Okay, and I really want to, like, as I'm pulling it out, I'm almost not putting any pressure on. I'm just letting it stay soft. I want it to fade out so you almost can't tell where that highlight ends. Okay. Now I'm going to work just my way up through the glass. So I got a little one here. Again, I'm going to start with the blending sump and see how far that takes me, but I'm probably going to start to run out of power here on it. So this is going to be sort of like a rectangular, maybe sort of pointy at the top, triangular type shape. But I want it subtle, so you should barely see a highlight forming, and you don't want the edges to be very sharp for some of these highlights. So what I have there, that little bit, that's good enough for me right now. Okay, you can try and get a little more white charcoal picked up if you want, or you can draw directly on. I'm going to keep using the blending sump for now, and I'm going to do a really subtle one up along this side here. Same idea. Really low pressure, and then it may seem like you're doing nothing, but if you just continue to sort of scribble with this, you are slowly adding that light value, but you're also doing it really, really soft. And those little subtle highlights really make this start to look real and shiny. Okay, so I have one along there. Picking up a little more charcoal. Okay, I'm going to add another small one, sort of just a vertical. I'm going along, I'm still following this angle here. Small one here, and again, really light pressure, and then once you know you don't have a lot of charcoal left on there, you can add pressure and just keep running over it to smooth it out. Okay, there's another one. I'm going to get some on the inside rim of the glass too. Okay, so again, really low pressure just to start to place it on. Direction usually doesn't matter a ton here because you're putting on so little color and you're rubbing it in so much that streakiness doesn't show up. Okay, so that one you can barely catch on the camera. I will intensify it a little bit for you. If you don't want to mess up any of your highlights by running your blending sump along here, you can always have a separate sheet of paper that you have some white charcoal scribbled on and pick up from there also, sort of like dipping a paintbrush into paint. Okay. Alright, so we have a couple more that are slightly more intense on this left side. Again, start subtle. You can always add the intensity later, but once it's too intense, it's harder to get rid of. Okay, so I'll start along here. Again, we're following that sort of angle of the edge of the glass. Just realized I did not get any major value changes along the inside of this rim, so I'm going to put some of those in now. You know, glass tends to have a thickness to it, at least drinking glasses do, so you don't want this line to be too fragile and thin all the way around, or it's going to look too sharp. You want it to still be soft and rounded. Okay, so if you haven't learned this in science class yet, light can bend. Okay, so glass is one of those things that can bend light. It's called refraction, I believe, if I remember right. So when you have this highlight here, when it tries to come through the second round of glass, it gets bent a little bit. So it's actually going to show up like over here. You may have noticed this like in real life when you have a straw in a glass of water, how the straw sort of appears out of place as it goes through the water or through the glass. And that's just the light bending as it kind of cuts through those transparent solids or liquids. So I'm just moving this highlight, I'm shifting it just a touch as I go through that second layer of glass as it comes through the front of it. Okay, I am watching to making sure my angle, my line kind of stays consistent best I can. Okay, so I added another one there. These can fuzz out, or you can keep them sharp. If you like how they look, don't worry about fuzzing it out too much if you like how it looks. And I'm going to have another one right here, so we're almost done with this. Okay, this one I'll have just be a little thicker. And once you reload your blending stump, make sure you start gently. You seem like you're not doing anything, but you are gradually adding. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with the look of this glass at the moment. So I'm not going to mess around too much with anything else. Sometimes you can overdo something, so really stop and evaluate your work often enough that you don't overdo it when you actually have a good result. And the last thing I'm going to add is just a little bit of a reflection for where the glass is sitting on the ground. So I'll go back in with my charcoal for that because I do want it to be kind of strong. So we're going in slightly inside the edge. So here's the edge of the glass. I'm moving in a touch. I'm going pretty much straight down. I'm kind of arcing along just like that is here. And I'm just going to always do shadows and reflections horizontally because they're not real objects. They're just showing up on a flat surface. So you need to go horizontally to mimic the flat surface. Same thing on the side. Moving in a little bit. Following along there, giving yourself a little gap. Color it in horizontally. Okay, I'm going to start with just a little bit. I'm going to slide this up a little bit so you can see. Okay, blending stump to start to soften it. Blending stump, you can go whatever direction you need to get rid of the streaks if you have them. And I'm just sort of letting it fade, so I am pulling it down, but I want that reflection to sort of disappear. Okay, a little more streaks here, so I am pressing fairly hard here to get rid of the streakiness that I got from my pencil. Okay, so I got the start of it. I am going to pull a little bits of it, bits and pieces of this in towards the center. Again, I'm being kind of inconsistent about it. You know, where light happens to be hitting. Go a little darker, so a little more layering for more intensity on the edges, since the edges of the glass also have more intensity. So your shadows should mimic your object as much as possible, or your reflections in this case. I don't know if I would call this a shadow. It's the light bouncing off and hitting the table, not light being blocked. Okay, and you can just adjust this until it feels right to you. You might want to put in maybe a few lines for, you know, how you have these lines here. Try and keep everything fuzzy though. Don't try and be too precise or too exact about anything when it comes to these reflections, because the light is bent, it's not landing as precisely anywhere. And there you have it. So, you can do a side-by-side, or before and after. This was my original glass, that's my second version. This one's got a little more of an angle to it than my first, so that can just go to show that, you know, we can have multiple variations of this that look good. So, if yours is a little more angular, doesn't matter, it's really the shading that does it here. So, feel free to rewind, pause, go back. You know, this, like I said, this charcoal pencil is easily erased, so as long as you're not pressing too hard or being too insane, you can really make a lot of adjustments with this. But this is about being subtle and thoughtful about where you put some certain things. And again, don't overdo it. Here I am tending to want to overdo certain sections. Know when to say when, but don't give up just because you think you can't do it. Try, and I think you'll be happy with your results. Please ask me questions anytime during this video if you need to. Don't ever hesitate. Good luck.